You ever hear a prediction that just kind of stops you in your tracks? Like not one of those doomsday prophecies or internet conspiracies, but something that makes you go, damn, that actually makes sense if you zoom out a little. So I heard this one thing. Somebody once said that Islam, not just as a religion, but as a living, breathing global culture, is going to go through a massive internal transformation, and not the kind of surface level, trendy Instagram hashtag kind of transformation. I'm talking about something deep, tectonic, like plates shifting under civilization kind of deep. The idea was that Islam would become the center point, the moral compass in a time when the world's losing its sense of direction.
Oh, yeah.
And that sounds wild, right? Because right now, we live in a world where any faith gets questioned, challenged, deconstructed every 5 seconds. You've got the internet, science, secularism, nihilism, dopamine addiction, politics, all pulling people away from traditional frameworks of belief. But this prediction said Islam's going to rise not through dominance, not through politics, but through a revival of meaning. Like when everyone's drowning in moral confusion, Islam would start to feel like an anchor again. Something ancient but strangely relevant. And honestly, if you really think about it, it's not that crazy. Islam's got this internal structure, faith, law, ethics, community, all connected. It's not like it was built for one time or one place. It's dynamic, adaptable. It went from the deserts of Arabia to the intellectual centers of Spain, Persia, North Africa, India, and every time it moved, it adapted without losing its core. So maybe what that prediction was really about wasn't some sudden revolution, but this gradual unfolding, a renewal. A time when Muslims themselves start reinterpreting what it means to live with God, consciousness in a hyper-technological, hyper-material world. Like, picture this, we're living in a world of AI, of genetic modification, of people uploading their consciousness. Everyone's chasing immortality through science and code, right? And there's this counter wave, people realizing that even if you upload your brain to a computer, you still haven't answered the real questions. What's the purpose? What's good? What's evil? What's real? And that's where faith steps in. That's where Islam, with its radical monotheism and its built-in moral philosophy, might just start resonating again. Now, if you say that out loud on a podcast, people freak out. They're like, what are you saying, Joe? You saying religion's going to take over? And I'm like, no, man, not take over, reemerge. It's like a river that went underground for a while and suddenly starts bubbling back up through the cracks. People forget the story of human civilization is basically the story of belief. We've always needed something to orient us. And maybe what's happening is that we're hitting this point where pure rationality, pure logic isn't enough anymore. You can build rockets and code algorithms and analyze DNA, but you can't code meaning. You can't simulate the human soul. So imagine Islam not as some political ideology or some rigid code, but as a global conversation, Muslims from every corner of the planet wrestling with faith in the modern world. Some pushing reform, others preserving tradition, but all of them searching for a way to live truthfully in chaos. And the crazy part? That search might end up shaping everyone else's search too. Because when one major civilization recenters itself morally, it doesn't happen in isolation. It affects culture, art, law, ethics, even science. That's what this prediction was about. It wasn't doom and gloom. It was about a shift, like the pendulum swinging back after centuries of secular dominance. A world that's been living off the fumes of old moral frameworks, suddenly realizing it needs fresh air. And where do you find that? In the same place humanity's always found it, in belief, in reflection, in surrender to something bigger than the self. It's not about converting anyone. It's about a civilization waking up to a deeper truth it already has buried under layers of politics, consumerism, and cultural fatigue. And that's why I think the prediction hit so hard, because if it's true, it's not just about Islam changing. It's about the world changing through Islam. You know what's funny, man? When people talk about the future, they always picture technology, flying cars, robots, AI overlords, all that sci-fi stuff. Nobody ever talks about the spiritual side of it. Nobody talks about what happens when people start running out of answers that money or science can't give. And I think that's what this whole idea is tapping into. That maybe the next big revolution isn't going to come from Silicon Valley. It's going to come from a shift inside human consciousness, and maybe Islam's going to play a huge role in that shift. Because if you strip it all down, Islam isn't just about rituals or rules. It's about awareness, the constant awareness of God, the idea that every act, every breath has meaning. And dude, in a world where everyone's distracted, where people can't even go 5 minutes without checking their phone, that level of consciousness is radical. That's not ancient, that's revolutionary. You look around, everyone's anxious, disconnected, cynical. They're hungry for meaning but allergic to structure. Islam gives structure. It gives daily discipline, rhythm, grounding. 5 prayers a day. That's like mindfulness before mindfulness was even a buzzword. And that's what people don't get. When they hear revival or transformation, they think it means going backward, like the world's going to suddenly rewind to the 7th century. Nah, man. What it really means is people rediscovering the essence of something that already worked and applying it to a world that's lost its balance. We've built a civilization that can measure the universe, but can't measure what's right. We can map the brain, but can't map the soul. So maybe this internal shift, this thing inside Islam, it's not about dominance, it's about relevance. And when I say relevance, I don't mean trendy. I mean timeless, the kind of wisdom that's built into human DNA, the kind that says, you're not the center of the universe, you're part of something bigger. Because that's the part that modern life killed. We turned everything into the self-image, self-worth, self-care, self-promotion. But faith, real faith, kills the ego. It humbles you. It says you're small, but that's beautiful. Now imagine millions of people rediscovering that mindset in a time when the world's drowning in narcissism. That's not just spiritual, that's psychological, that's cultural, that's civilizational. That could reshape how people see work, success, politics, even relationships. Like the idea that morality isn't some social construct, it's wired into the structure of the universe. And I think that's what freaks people out. Because if Islam, or any deep moral system, reclaims the stage, it challenges the world we've built around moral relativism. It says, hey, not everything's up for debate. Not everything's flexible. There are still absolutes. And man, people don't like absolutes anymore. We live in a time where everything's negotiable. Truth, identity, even biology. So the idea that there's a growing faith movement saying, no, there's right and wrong. That shakes people. But maybe that's the kind of shake we need. Because chaos can't sustain itself forever. The pendulum always swings back. Every time humanity goes too far in one direction, too rational, too secular, too individualistic, there's always a correction. Maybe this revival. This transformation inside Islam is that correction. Maybe it's not about converting the world, but reminding the world of something it forgot, that the universe has a center. And it ain't us. And here's the wild part. The prediction wasn't that it would happen through politics or some leader or some movement. It was through regular people, through hearts waking up, like a million tiny awakenings adding up to a global wave. Young people reading scripture with fresh eyes, scholars digging into meaning beyond dogma, artists finding ways to express faith in modern language. That's how real revolutions happen, not with slogans, but with shifts in consciousness. And when that happens, it won't just be about Islam transforming. It'll be about the rest of us realizing that belief, real, disciplined, practiced belief still has power in a world that pretends it doesn't need it. You know what gets me, man? When you start really thinking about how ideas move through history, like we treat religion like it's this fixed thing carved in stone, but it's not. It's alive. It evolves, it reacts. Every few centuries something happens and a tradition wakes up and re-examines itself. It's like a forest fire that clears the dead wood so new growth can start. And maybe that's what's happening right now inside Islam. Picture this, a kid sitting somewhere in Cairo, another one in Jakarta, one in London, one in Lagos. They've got their phones out. They've got access to everything. Science papers, lectures, podcasts, texts in translation. And they're all asking the same question, how do I live with meaning? That's not a small thing. That's a generational pulse. When enough people start asking that, something shifts. And it's not a rebellion against modernity. It's a rebellion against emptiness. People are tired of the grind. Man, we built this giant machine of productivity and entertainment, but it chews up your sense of purpose. You can scroll for hours and still feel hollow. So when a system like Islam steps forward, and says there's a structure, there's discipline, there's justice, there's peace, there's mercy. That starts sounding like oxygen. Now, imagine that pulse spreading. It starts inside individuals. One person gets serious about prayer. Another studies philosophy. Another starts building a business guided by ethics instead of greed. Pretty soon, you're not just talking about spiritual transformation. You're talking about economics, politics, community. It leaks into everything. Because belief isn't a hobby, it's architecture. It shapes how you build stuff, how you treat people, what kind of future you even think is possible. That's the part that freaks politicians out. They like systems they can predict, markets they can control. But belief, real belief, that's unpredictable. It makes people brave. It makes them do the right thing even when it costs them. And if enough people live that way, you don't just get a religious revival, you get a new moral economy. And here's where it gets really interesting. Historically, every empire, every civilization hits that point where it has all the toys but no soul left. Rome had it. So did the British Empire, so does the modern West. When that happens, the energy moves somewhere else, somewhere younger, hungrier, spiritually alive. Maybe that energy's moving east and south now. Maybe that's why you see this renewed curiosity about faith, law, justice, balance coming from Muslim societies. They're wrestling with the hard stuff, and that wrestling is what keeps a civilization awake. People think revival means strictness or control, but sometimes it means creativity, philosophy, art. Think about when Europe rediscovered Aristotle through Muslim scholars, it kick-started the Renaissance. Maybe we're on the edge of another cross-pollination moment, but this time it's global. The internet is the new Silk Road, ideas bouncing between continents in real time. You've got Muslim physicists, filmmakers, activists, mystics all in the same online space. That's not chaos. That's potential energy. And man, if that energy starts organizing around a moral center again, it could rebalance the world, not by overthrowing anybody, but by reminding humanity that progress without ethics is just acceleration toward a cliff. A civilization with rockets but no compass. That's what this whole internal transformation idea points to. Islam, at its core, is obsessed with justice, with accountability. That's the antidote to the chaos of infinite freedom with no responsibility. Ta-da! So yeah, maybe that's the next stage. Not domination, not conversion, just recentering. 1 billion people remembering who they are, and the rest of the world watching that clarity and going, wait, maybe we need some of that too? Ciao. You ever notice how people talk about the world ending all the time? Like, every few years, it's a new apocalypse. Climate nukes, AI, whatever. But if you zoom out, maybe it's not the end that's coming. It's just the end of an old mindset. Maybe what's really dying is that idea that humans can run on pure logic and still stay sane. We've been worshiping progress for so long that we forgot to ask what we're progressing toward. And this is where that idea of an Islamic transformation hits me hardest. Because it's not about religion taking over. It's about meaning taking the mic again. You can't run a species on dopamine and GDP forever. At some point, people need roots. They need to know what the rules are, what the point is, what the limits are. Islam has that built right in humility before something greater, a rhythm of worship that keeps you human. 5 times a day you stop, you breathe, you remember you're not a god. In a culture that treats self-worship like a sport, that's radical. So imagine that mindset spreading quietly. Artists start making stuff with moral weight again. Scientists start asking not just can we, but should we? Economies start judging success by fairness instead of just growth. It's subtle at first. A shift in tone, a shift in questions, but it snowballs. Suddenly, the vibe of the planet changes from how do I win to I live right. I think that's what scares people. The idea that belief could make a comeback, but not in the old medieval way, in a modern, self-aware way. People think faith and reason are enemies, but maybe they're teammates that got separated in the chaos. You put them back together and you get balance again. You get innovation with conscience, freedom with boundaries, power with humility. And yeah, that's a big ask because the modern world is addicted to control. We like to think we can engineer everything, our moods, our identities, even our ethics. But maybe the next evolution isn't more control, it's surrender, not blind surrender, but intelligent surrender. The kind that says, I don't run this show, but I've got a role in it. That's the vibe of Islam when you strip away the noise, alignment, discipline, gratitude. Duh. If that really starts catching fire, if people begin seeing that discipline not as restriction, but as liberation, it changes everything. You stop being a slave to impulses, to advertising, to algorithms. You get clarity, and clarity is contagious. When someone lives with that kind of focus, everyone around them feels it. It's like gravity. It pulls people in. So, yeah, maybe the prediction, the idea isn't about conquest or prophecy. It's about gravity. A moral gravity emerging in a world floating off its axis. That's not something you can legislate or market. It just happens when people decide to live by principles again. And if enough of them do, you get a civilization reboot, not a collapse.
Cha-cha-cha.